I'd like to officially welcome you to this public consultation regarding the review of street checks, otherwise known as carding. On behalf of the team and Justice Tulloch and myself, my name is Kika Ojo, and I'm your facilitator for the evening. And so I just wanted to acknowledge your presence. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your patience. Do continue to enjoy some dinner. And if people come as they come and they join you at your tables, do encourage them to grab a bite as well. I want to start off by just acknowledging the youth in the room. It's so important when we can get youth engaged in this conversation, so thank you for coming. And also the elders in the room. We acknowledge you and we are grateful that you're here. Regarding French translation, we do have a French translator, or an English translator, I guess, in the back, and there are headsets. So if you need translation assistance, there are headsets on my left at the very back of the room that you can access, okay? So Justice Tulloch is gonna come up and officially welcome you and say a few words to provide some context. And then my colleague Danielle Dowdy will come up and share a bit more about some of the logistics. And then I'll pop back up to start you off on your conversations at your tables. And then you'll have some time to discuss the issues at your tables. And then there'll be a report back that I'll facilitate, a report back process, and that will be the evening. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Justice Tulloch up to welcome you. Thank you.
I want to thank you, Kike, for your introduction. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank all of you for coming out this evening. My name is Michael Tulloch, and I'm a judge who sits on the Court of Appeal for Ontario. Before we begin, I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is a traditional territory of the Atawanaderon, Anishinaabe, as well as the Haudenosaunee peoples. I also recognize the contributions of the Métis and Inuit and other indigenous peoples who have made contributions to these territories, both in shaping and strengthening this community, the province, and the country as a whole. Now, by acknowledging this traditional territory, we're recognizing and respecting the First Peoples of this country. It is also the recognition of their presence and contributions, both in the past and the present. However, we must recognize that acknowledging the traditional territory of these lands is only the beginning to recreating a respectful relationship with the Indigenous peoples in Ontario and Canada. Now, I'm here this evening in the capacity of an independent reviewer of the new regulations passed by the Ontario government in 2016, which has put in place to regulate the police practice of street checks and more specifically, which was intended to limit or ban the arbitrary interaction of police or some police officers with members of the public for the sole purpose of collecting their personal identifying information. I am an independent reviewer, which means my position is independent of the government as well as independent of the police. Now, as indicated, I was asked by the Ontario government to conduct this independent review on June 7th, 2017. I will be reviewing the content of the regulation to see whether it reflects the important goal of ensuring bias-free police community interactions, as well that police and public interactions are consistent and conducted in a way that promotes public trust and confidence, while at the same time respecting individual rights and civil liberties. I will also be reviewing the regulation with a view to determine whether or not police services, chiefs, and police services boards are in compliance with its terms and are following it. I will be conducting a very comprehensive review of this regulation, and in order to do that, I put together or assembled a team to assist me in this regard. Now, since September, we have been engaged in a very extensive consultation process throughout the province, and now we've embarked on our public consultations. Today's consultation in Windsor marks, I think it's the ninth out of 12 consultations. I intend to draw on what I have been learning from these consultations to formulate a report with recommendations on the regulation. And this report will be submitted to the government on November the 30th, 2018, and be made available to the public no later than January the 1st, 2019. Now, by way of background, the regulation is intended to govern the police and public interaction when the police is seeking to obtain a person's identifying information in situations where a legal statutory duty, such as the Highway Traffic Act or the Trespass to Property Act, does not engage, and where the persons that is being interacted with by the police are not legally obligated to provide that information. Now, in situations where the Highway Traffic Act or the Trespass to Property Act is the basis of the demand for personal identifying information, then citizens are obliged and obligated to provide their personal information to the police. Also, in situations where someone is under what's called a investigative detention, where they're being specifically investigated for a crime, or when someone is being arrested, they are obliged to provide their personal information to the police. Now, the regulation outlines what an officer must do if they ask for your identifying information. The regulation is not intended to stop the police from speaking with the public or the public from speaking with the police. The regulation is intended to stop the police from randomly and arbitrarily collecting personal information from members of the public who they speak with. The regulation also provides information and guidelines on the storage of information that comes from the street checks. As well, it provides the mandatory training for all police on the new rules, the development of policies and procedures by police services and police services boards, as well as the public reporting requirements by the police services. Now, with that background in mind, I look forward to this evening. I want to emphasize once again that this review is fully independent. We are not here as a part of the government, but we're here to listen to what your experiences are, what your views are on this particular regulation. And I can assure you that at the end of this process, your voices will be heard, and we will reflect whatever we heard that is able to enhance the review process. So again, thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our young folks. Before we get started, I'm just gonna, j'ai une petite annonce en français. Sachez qu'un service d'interprétation vers le français est disponible. Veuillez vous munir des écouteurs que vous trouverez à l'arrière de la salle si vous souhaitez écouter en français. So I'm just going to run through this really quickly so that we can get started, since the time is a bit far gone. So welcome to our consultation. We have been traveling the province of Ontario, and we're really happy to be in Windsor this evening. Part of our consultation is not just hearing from you in these public meetings, but also in a variety of ways. So on social media, but also you'll see we now have a community survey on our website. So if you go visit streetchecksreview.ca, you have the option to fill out a survey so that we can also analyze that data on your experiences. And the purpose of our public consultations really is to hear from folks, to see how the regulation is working, to hear your recommendations and any suggestions, any advice that you have for us. And so you'll see that there's a lot of paperwork at your tables. We're going to ask you to do just a little bit of work this evening and working together to answer some of the questions that we're trying to solve or we're trying to find answers to with this review. Just as a disclaimer, the review does not deal with individual cases. So if you've had a situation in particular with the police, we would love to hear that because that's helpful and it's very informative for us and it helps us to understand kind of the context of what's going on. But we're not here to actually resolve any individual cases. There's still different avenues for you to be able to pursue to get that resolved if that's the case, but that's not with our review. And so the way this is going to work, we're just running through the introduction now, and then we're going to get right into the roundtable discussions. So you'll see that there's an engagement guide on your table, and there's pens, and there's also paper. We're going to ask you to go through the questions. You don't have to go through them one by one. If there's a question that your table is really interested in that you want to focus on, feel free to do that. But there's a set of questions there that mirror the regulation, and we're going to ask you to answer those questions to the best of your ability and in your group discussions. And then once that is done, we're going to allot some time for a report back. So each table will appoint a person to report back what you discussed, and we'll be here taking notes, and Justice Tulloch will be here listening and taking notes as well. And we are on social media as well. We are tweeting and posting under the hashtag StreetChecks, hashtag StreetChecks. So we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. Feel free to join in the conversation, to tweet about or post anything that you see there. You'll see all of our social media accounts are up here. And by that same vein, we're also live streaming this evening on Facebook Live. So our webcam is actually right at the back of the room. If our webcam guy can wave, thank you. If you don't want to be on camera, that's where the camera is. You'll also notice that some of us will have our phones and we're taking pictures. We're actually tweeting and we're posting. If you don't want your picture taken, it's not an issue. Just let us know and we'll move it along. But that's where the pictures are going. So feel free to check back on our account to see, if you see us taking your picture, that's where it is. And also, if you have any questions after this evening, you can always go to our website and get all the information there. Our live streams are posted on our website. And if you have anything that you'd like to share with us further that you didn't get a chance to share this evening, feel free to send us an email at info@streetchecksreview.ca. And that's it. Thank you so much for coming, and we wish you a very fruitful discussion.
Okay, so just before we kick off, I'm just going to give you a couple of instructions. So this is table work. So if you are alone at a table, please relocate so that you can have people to speak to about the subject matter. It works probably best if you select someone to take notes at the table and someone to be the report back person when the time is up. So think about that. So again, if you're alone at your table, if you would relocate and also pick someone to be a scribe and pick someone to be a reporter. We will start the conversation again around 7:30. So if you would sort of plan for that, and I guess really consider ensuring that everyone around the table has an opportunity to speak. Really consider what we call social location. So if there are people around the table who express that they have this experience in their lives, like they should, have some space to tell their stories. And so if you would sort of consider who's holding space at your table, that would be really, really effective and important. Okay, so we will be back to you at 7:30 to start the report back process. Okay, thank you. All right, thanks. Thank you so much. Hopefully you had a fruitful discussion. It is 7:30, and it's time for report backs. Hopefully you've selected someone to do the reporting. Thank you. Thank you so much for your attention. This is the good part, where you get to share. So, my only request is that while a particular table has the floor, that we're all listening to that table. That's my only request. So are we prepared? Are we ready? My colleague Dave, who has the microphone in his hand there. Dave, would you just wave, please? Thank you. The man with the mic. He's the definer of who gets to speak. So, sorry, I'm just noting that we've got a table that hasn't acknowledged. We are ready. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're ready. So Dave has selected a table. So each table will have about 3 minutes. I will give you a yellow card, which is your indication that you have about 30 seconds if you've gone on, okay? And we're hoping that you can make that work. And so think about what you want Justice Tulloch to know. I just want to remind everyone that this is, in fact, an independent review of the street checks regulation, otherwise known as carding. So what that means is that Justice Tulloch and the team do not represent the government, do not represent any particular police organization. You will see people walking around the room with white tags, like myself or like my colleague Dave. You may see us taking notes. We are a part of Justice Tulloch's team and helping him prepare for what he needs to do. Okay? So Dave, you've selected someone? We're ready to go. Thank you so much. Go ahead, sir.
It's live now? Is it? It is. Okay. Okay, this is in point form, so please excuse me if I have to add lib into this. So the first question we did many discussions on was, what does carding mean? We talked a lot about training and recruitment. Oh, that is right. Training. Training and recruitment. We don't hear so much in Windsor. We've heard more about in Metropolitan and Toronto. I know I've said that. Rural versus urban differences. Look for implicit, explicit biases at recruitment. We discussed about the RCMP and gender bias, and the military as well as gender bias. Someone had mentioned in our group, nothing has changed. All that's happening is just ongoing consultations. We don't seem to be seeing anything happening in action where it needs to be. And discussion about there should be an accountability, a civilian oversight, not just the police investigating the police themselves, but an actual civilian oversight that is arm's length from the police. And remove politics from policing. We had a quick side note about this meeting that, for example, it was not advertised adequately. There should have been more public information. I know I found out just quickly through Facebook. Okay. The benefits for public, I think I'm going, what is for public carding, what could be good for carding, benefits for public safety, a base for starting investigations. However, there should be relationships building, talk to the people, don't just ask them who they are, just for community policing, just talk to them, don't insinuate, okay? Don't need to know their names. And then we talked about the receipts, not sure what the purpose is this effective? And the data, needs to be publicly available. There's a lot of talk. They're saying, from what we understand, when they take down our names, that goes into a database. So what's that database used for? And is that database accessible by the public? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry? Oh, well, yes, we did also discuss a lot about racism as well. Okay. Okay.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, so at our table, we had the pleasure of actually having three police officers here. So we got a lot of intel in regards to the use of carding and the collection of intelligence. So this gave us, I think, a deeper perspective as to why police have used carding in the past. However, where we did have some concerns is in regards to how long these cards would be in place and what their use would be afterwards. So whether that be through whether they be used in the future for ongoing investigations is questionable, and how long they are going to be on the record. So I'm not sure if the committee had anything to put towards that. Also, we did talk specifically about Windsor Police Services, and from talking with these gentlemen, we see that this might be a larger issue in Toronto. However, it definitely still affects smaller communities, I believe. Windsor is obviously not a city with one type of people, so therefore these implicit biases obviously do play a factor in the day-to-day interactions with police. Oh, in regards to training, we did also have some questions in regards to the training that police do have in the academy, and then also while policing on a yearly basis. So these gentlemen did mention that they do certain types of training based on topics every year, in which they have to conduct 40 hours of training. However, whether that is efficient is questionable. And then also we did take a look at the specific legislation, and we questioned whether it has impacted the services offered by Windsor Police or Windsor Police Services. And we decided that there is no real changes that have come out of this legislation, and in fact, we thought that the legislation actually offers just more opportunity for confrontational interactions with police, as people are now more aware of their right to question police, and yeah, if anybody else wants to add from our table. That's good. That's all.
Thank you.
All right, first and foremost, I'd like to give thanks for providing space for us to gather and conjure collective intelligence around this important issue. Many of us in the room know that so-called racialized groups, specifically to the history, Black and Indigenous communities have been abused since first contact on this continent. You know, and we gather here today to reflect on, you know, the perpetuation and maybe some solutions around these things. First question, have you heard of street checks and carding? Collectively, our table says yes. But one of the comments here is, yes, but I thought it was a joke. Like in a world like this, is that something? And it is, and it's sad. Knew it was happening, felt like it was harassment. Found it unhelpful. Nothing positive about it. Doesn't make me feel safe. Targets low-income areas. Second question, what do street checks and carding mean to you? The answer that we have here collectively is that it perpetuates labeling and everything that's attached to that, and also pointless. Question 3, are you aware of the new regulations that came into effect January 1st, 2017? And also, where did you learn about it? We have a collective no. Didn't know about it. Don't know my rights. They don't know how to interact with us. By them, we're referring to police officers and people in those positions of authority. Question 4, do members of the public know enough about the regulations? Do members of the public know enough about their rights when interacting with police? If not, what could be done to improve awareness of rights and regulations? The first answer to that was no, but following that was we need more education in the schools. And I think this was in regards to like our rights as civilians when dealing or interacting with people in positions of authority, particular police officers. Communities and community centers, like having that information accessible. And for 5, under the heading of police stops, do you think that street checks and carding have any benefit when it comes to public safety? No benefit. More reason to hassle minorities. Question 6, when should police stop and talk to people in communities? I felt all the time. You know, they should drive with their window down, and they should be full of like waves and smiles and these sorts of things. You know, there should be that sort of accessibility. You know, I don't know that police officers always need to be guarded in riot gear. You know, it's threatening. You know, quite frankly, it's threatening. They should be involved with the community. You know, they should be making random visits, and I'm not sure those visits should be random. I think we should know when they're coming, because sometimes they catch you offhand and you're like, I don't know who they're here for, you know, and unfortunately, that's the way a lot of us feel when we see that uniform come into the room. They should be pleasant, and they should always say hi. And number 7, what obligation should police have when they stop and talk to people? They should treat people with mutual respect. I know that they understand that they have a certain authority over people, and when they go into communities, they have a certain responsibility, but respect should be the number one. You have to give respect to get respect. And that's where we stopped. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, we have another comment at the table?
Sure.
The last question was, have you ever been stopped by police in the last year? If yes, like our answer. A lot of us at this table, you know, we had similar experiences with police. Most were negative. And we came to the table and we come to a conclusion of a lot of us feel uncomfortable when we're approached by some police officers. Sometimes it's not even if they're a certain skin color that looks the same way as me, I still see their badge first before I, you know, view the person's character. So we were stopped by police because there was an altercation at a car towing place. And the altercation happened and the people called the police to come, right? So we got stopped on the way going home. And the police officer pulled us over and he asked like if we had our license and, you know, the insurance. But the person who was driving didn't have their insurance on them. So, but they had an expired one. The police officer instead told the guy, like, you don't have it, I'm pretty sure that you don't, went back to the car. And when he came back, he asked us if we had any guns in the car. It was myself, my boyfriend, and his mom. So obviously, when you're asked that question, it's kind of like raising of either A, it's racial profiling, B, why do you think that, we would have any guns or anything in the car? So the officer felt like we were threatening, so he told us that, we're gonna tow your car, you need to grab all your belongings out of it. Grabbed everything, and then the three of us were arrested in the middle of the street, and they made us sit down. I felt more so of embarrassed because it wasn't just the police officer who was there. He called 3 more cops to come over, and it was just more so of like a public humiliation over misunderstanding and not knowing my rights or who to call or like the understanding of the situation, period. So I feel as if though a lot of police officers do come with aggression, and just from personal experiences, I don't feel like this is a good change. It's not, no positive is going to come from it. So.
Thank you. I just want to, while Dave is making his way to another table, I just want to acknowledge that these conversations are difficult, and that for a lot of people, it is a reliving of experiences that in many cases are traumatizing. And I just want to, thank you, because at the end of the day, if you weren't willing to go back there in your mind to recount, then we wouldn't be able to learn collectively from your experiences and from your stories. So, the team acknowledges that we're asking you to go back and relive and oftentimes sort of re-experience trauma and traumatizing experiences, and we know. So thank you.
My name is Kenny Badebo. I represent Youth Connection Association. George here is supposed to be the spokesperson, but for some reason, he chickened out. I wish he could have been the person to talk, because I think the young people are the one that are most affected. And just hearing them, it seems to affirm, some of the things we've been talking about. I try to explain to them anyways. They don't seem to understand what carding means. So I try to explain to them, meaning street check, and I was asking them, anything like that happened to you? And all of them here, the 3 boys sitting down with me, they told me that it happens to them. It happens to them at the park, where the police will just, roll down the window and be asking them, what they're doing outside. And then we're talking about 8 o'clock or 8:30. Also, they told me that it happens at the park. It happens to them at the bus station, where the police is asking them if they recognize somebody they're looking for. Then I was asking them, how does it make you feel? All of them saying here that they find it so creepy that the police will be asking them such a thing. And then George here is saying that they feel very, very afraid. And also they indicate the fact that they feel they've been watched all the time. This is what the boys are telling me. I just asked them, and this is what he's saying. And then I was asking them, how does it make them feel? And do they know anything about all this street check? They're telling me there's no education whatsoever. No education in schools. Nobody's telling them about all this that is happening. And just to let you know, my organization, Youth Connection, a few years back, there was something very, very similar to what you guys are doing. I made a presentation, and based on that, we approached the chief of police of the city at the time, Glenn Stannard. And then we developed a brochure. It's called Know Your Right. In the brochure, there's everything that the young people need to know. At the time, we developed close to about thousands and thousands that was sent to the school to form the civic education. But unfortunately, that has been forgotten. And then we asked the present chief, Frederick, to see whether we can develop something similar, because this is something that all these children need to know. And just listen to the young girl that just talked. There's no education. We need to go back to school. We have all these, our diversity officer who happen to be black officers. They should be going to the school to be able to provide education on this very issue that you guys are talking about. Anyways, that's all I have to say, just based on what the kids are talking about. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Joy Hurst here. First, I'd like to say, as far as getting the message out, I've been following the judge himself since the SIU was here, and the information has been everywhere. I've shared it, all the organizations have shared it, and I think because when we started sharing it, of course, it's been a while back because they planned well ahead. And then by the time it gets here,
Yeah.
maybe some people forgot, I don't know. But we have a nice crowd here, and I really appreciate everybody being here and being a part of this. And of course, we appreciate the judge and his staff. But the first thing I'd like to say about the carding, I personally, and some of us at the table, don't feel it's a good idea. From personal experience of talking to the youth with our organization, the Coalition, some of the children have been stopped. They weren't carded. They were stopped and asked, "Is that your bike?" Or they're with a bunch of white children and they get asked, "Do you have weed on you?" So carding, street checks, absolutely not. I don't think it's fair. I think it's targeting certain class of society. These are all the answers we've come up with together. And we have a paralegal here with us, and he has a great perspective on things. But we also must understand, sitting at my table here, we're very diverse. So our opinions are going to come from different perspectives, and that's what we must understand as we sit here today. Everybody's experience is different. Okay, now I'm going to go to number 2. What do street checks mean to us? And we just answered that. It's kind of like harassment, actually. Are we aware of the new regulations that came into effect? I learned from it, from the judge and his findings, through his research, and we follow him, and then we share it with our youth and our organizations. That's how we find out about it. I live here in Windsor. I work with the diversity officers. I've never heard of this. But I will say our diversity officers have come out to us. They have been a part of our programming with our youth. They've stepped up with new programming that's coming up, but I think the only way that our youth is going to find this out, or even us as adults, when these new laws come into place, this is a very important law, these laws that are coming out, they should be going around to the different schools, boards of education, having assemblies with all the youth and explaining what these new laws are. Because otherwise we're not going to know until something happens and our rights are deprived from us because we don't know our rights. So I think it should be brought into a public forum such as this, but within our own cities, because you guys can't do it all. You can't be everywhere all the time. So just by you guys having this, now we're going to take this information, we're going to bring it to our organizations that we have here in Windsor, but this is how we have to find things out. We don't get this from our local police or local leaders to bring this down to our people. We just don't get it. And we have a lot of issues with our youth coming to us with these types of complaints where we've had to organize programs to teach them their rights. As black children, we shouldn't have to do that to anybody, or it should be as a whole. But we have to teach our black children these types of rights because of what's happening to them. They have nowhere to go with it, but now we're making these avenues available to them. Not recognizing smaller oh yes, one of the issues we have in our area is we have a lot of towns, smaller towns, Leamington, Essex, Amherstburg, and a lot of these issues aren't recognized there because there's such a smaller amount of black people in these towns, so they just have nowhere to go. I mean, they just deal with it, and I think it's sad because we're not reaching out to our communities like we should. I'm sure even up in Toronto or the bigger cities, there's a lot of communities on the outskirts that don't get that attention they need because it's a smaller amount of people that are going through this, so they don't get the attention or recognition. So that's one of the big things we have here. Do you think this is an effective way to make sure that police follow the regulation? Is that what it says right here? Okay. Okay, we have a couple of questions regarding this application and interpretation thing here. Actually, it contradicts itself. Because if you look at it, number one, part one, application and interpretation, it almost contradicts itself, you know, in the law that's written there. And so there's loopholes all throughout that. You know, they have it written there, but if you look through it, and we have our legal assistant here that kind of brought it to our attention, but there's loopholes all in there. So yeah, they have it written one way, but there's other ways they can get around that. You know what I mean? So again, carding, absolutely not. Street checks, we don't think it's appropriate. We're already being harassed. Our youth are already being harassed. This is just like giving them the legal way to do it, as far as we're concerned. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
So I'm at a table with a young brother and some young sisters. Thankfully, they don't have too many negative experiences with the police, and they didn't have too much experience with this carding legislation. However, I asked them what's their general opinion about police, and there was a consensus that they're pretty much bullies. So even though there is that they don't have negative experiences, they feel that the police are bullies a little bit. Furthermore, they feel that when they're in groups, 2 or 3 or more of them, they feel a little bit more targeted by the police, and that they felt that they're seen as being up to no good more often than not. And I briefly explained just because you're in a large group of people shouldn't equate to you being up to no good. Someone brought up the example of a Dollarama being beside the high school, and sometimes police officers kind of harassing a little bit in terms of, well, if you're not buying anything in the store, why are you here? Secondly, I also asked them about basically the community resource officers that are in the schools. I asked their opinions on how they felt about that. Again, not too many negative experiences. They said that they don't really see too many of the resource officers unless they have to do a presentation or things like that, but there's not too much engagement between the students and the police officers. Going back to education of rights, like some people already mentioned, these young folks did not know that they can refuse to give their name and information if they're not directly implicated in a crime or doing anything bad. So again, reiterating that education is key. And one of the last things we discussed, I just asked them, well, if you could build the perfect police force in Windsor, what would that look like? And the answer that came back is just more diversity, because if there's that cultural sensitivity, it's more likely to diffuse situations instead of causing aggression if you see someone more like you. And that's pretty much it from our table.
Thank you.
No, I'm good. I'm good. Hi, my name is Jaden Oje Maxwell. I'm representing this fine group of young men here. When it came to this session of the street checks, the first question was obviously asked, has any of these gentlemen heard of the street checks or have they been stopped by the police? 3 out of the 8 of the gentlemen have actually been stopped at this point in time and even have any idea of what the street checks are. So some of the gentlemen have been experienced, some haven't. When it came to what the street checks and what being stopped by a member of law enforcement means to this group, the answers kind of varied, but it did resonate mostly around fear, which is unfortunate. Some of them said that their first instinct is to run based on just natural instincts. Others, their natural instinct is just to be afraid. Others, their first thought process is this person may be racist. Other thought process is just that officers in general are people to be wary of, some more so in the States than here, but they're just right off the bat a negative connotation when it comes to law enforcement and the youth in the community, which is something that I believe is the main thing that we have to be focusing on to kind of weed out that negative connotation whenever a youth sees an officer. It doesn't have to be a negative feeling or a scary feeling, and the first thought process should not be to run, because that obviously just sets yourself up for failure, the way I see it. When it comes to whether or not anybody was aware of the street checks, and if so, and if not, how would we make it more apparent for the youth to become more aware? Obviously, being a group of younger males, we all understood and came to the consensus that we should be utilizing things like the television and the internet, like Google and social media. And this kind of information should be a lot more out there and a lot more in people's face, that this is something that isn't necessarily new. Even though these regulations are being put forth now and are being like regulated now, they're not necessarily new practices. So there's just something that should have been out there more, and people should not have to be finding out about this now. It should be things that are easily accessible. When it comes to question 5, as to whether or not street checks have any benefit towards the community at all, luckily, this is a very optimistic group of young men, and there was a lot of yeses around the table. However, it does take some kind of context. Some of the young men thought that there was no reason to be doing these street checks, but a few of the others said that, when it comes to matters of safety, they would rather that if there are crimes going on in their specific community, that there are officers to be asking the necessary questions, because these young men are aware that if there's something bad going on, questions need to be asked to find the answers. Now, when it comes to the point in time and the context of asking questions, that's where it varied, and there was an understanding that unless there is an active crime or an active investigation being taken place, there shouldn't be a reason to just be asking for information. So I believe the general consensus came down to that there is an appropriate time and place for those kind of acts, and it should more so be when there is an active investigation, not just to find the information. Now, in terms of when it's appropriate to be stopped by an officer of law enforcement, once again, there was kind of a yes and no thing where this young group of men, they understood that there are times and places where it's necessary and it's appropriate to be stopped by law enforcement to be asked necessary questions, such as in the event of a crime that just took place, or some very valuable information that, the police are trying to prevent a crime. But when it comes to when and how people should be stopping, once again, and with this group, they were very certain that unless there is a crime, they don't feel the need to be stopped. They don't feel the desire to be stopped, because it right off the bat puts them in a mind space where they have to ask themselves, should I be afraid? Should I run? Am I in danger? And once, as humans, we get into that fight or flight mindset, the decisions we make right off the bat aren't necessarily our core decisions, or just reflexes. So oftentimes we can get in trouble for no reason aside from reacting in a way that we weren't able to control. When it comes to question 8, as to have the police ever stopped anyone in this group last year, luckily they have not. And when it comes to the thoughts on the whole process of the receipt, and being, as I was explaining to the gentleman, the understanding that at this point in time, it is so that if stopped and if requested for certain information, there is an obligation, and the law enforcement is now obliged to provide a receipt to be able to show the interaction, and if need be, to have some necessarily comeuppance as to what happened with it. And a lot of the gentlemen here did like the sound of that. They weren't necessarily aware that that was the case, but now that they are aware of that, I feel like I saw a few faces of relief to know that if something does happen, there is an avenue now to explore the means to have necessary penalties, people to be taken account of, because oftentimes if no one feels there's anything going to come out of complaining, it's just a waste of time. So now that there is an understanding that there is a process and there is a procedure to go through and be provided a receipt and then to follow through the necessary median, it sounds like this group of young men, they like the idea of that. And
Your last one, Jaden? Do you have a lot more?
No, one more.
Okay, thank you.
And the last thing, when it comes to being approached by law enforcement, the main thing when it came to being approached is just the fundamentals that at least this group of young men, they would like to be approached with respect. They would like to be approached with manners, and to not be approached in an aggressive manner. And so long as that can be done, everyone here thinks that, we can interact as humans and move forward.
Can you tell me about the age group because I think this table, most of the youth that came in from the MH 100 program are around the same age. Is that right?
We're 12 to 14 here, I believe, right?
Yeah, that's good. That's good context. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much. The one question here were you ever stopped in the year 2017? And the answer is yes. I've been stopped and profiled, even though I do community work or things like that. To the police officers, sometimes everybody looks alike, right? So the biggest thing was how they come and ask you for your ID, right? They come in really aggressive. They might come at you thinking that you already done something just because you're from a certain neighborhood in Windsor. And the biggest thing here is to change that. If the police come with more respect, again, we said it at a few different tables, and the same common thing is that if they come with more respect and ask nicely, maybe the young kids will answer nicely, right? We'll give them their ID. But usually they come very, very aggressive, not knowing where we come from, and it makes it so hard for us. And the table over there, the young ladies over there, they live in the same neighborhood. I'm talking about you guys in the back. And the thing is, they always tell me in our neighborhood, the police actually know who these kids are, who the troublemakers are, or who the drug dealers are, right? But they seem to question the other kids that are trying to do well, right? So it happened to me when I was a young kid. The YMCA used to be on Victoria Street, and I had to walk across Olette, which is busy, clubs and things like that, where there's a lot of police officers. As I'm walking home from the YMCA playing basketball with my backpack, they thought I was somebody else and asked me for my ID. Obviously, I was a young kid. I didn't have no ID. Next thing you know, they arrested me, put me on the back of the thing, and then later on found out that I was just a kid trying to walk home. So the big mistake of thinking that these kids are troublemakers and just because they look like the other kids, that's the misconception that's going on right now. And if they can come with more respect, and the one thing that the police can do, obligations that police have when they stop and talk to people, or when should police stop and talk to people in the community? I think if the police officers and they come in the community and host, say things like barbecues and not come in uniform, right, and talk to the people and talk to these kids. We've been running the program for 8 years, like I spoke to you guys, but no police officers have ever came to the program. They seem like we have to go and find them, or they only come to our area when there's something going on, or they're looking for somebody, right? But they don't come to our area on a positive note. Right? They don't come to the area to just talk to these kids or play basketball with the kids or host different type of fun activities for the kids in the neighborhood. And I think that if they did that and they came to see who's good and who's not, by coming to these neighborhoods, it'd be a better situation, and we can have a safer place, and we can work together. Because the biggest thing here is, hopefully, what I'm thinking is the police is trying to have a safer neighborhood for these kids. So I think if everybody work together, then we can all be on the same page. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to personally thank Your Honor and those and your crew here for coming, for spending your time and going across Ontario and making this a matter of public concern. I'm a licensed social worker. I've been a social worker for 30 years. I work downtown area. I work in the Mission, Salvation Army, St. Vincent de Paul. I live in 920 Olette. And there's a lot of things that need to be done. Tonight I want to mention about due process. And there was a man that left the Mission. He was 74 years old. He had no drugs on him. He had no guns, no knives. He was just walking down the street by Street Health, and a police car pulled up. 2 officers jumped out, grabbed him. He's 74 years old, senior citizen by himself, and they grabbed and threw him on the ground, and they twisted his arm, and his bone popped out of his shoulder, and he was left there on the ground screaming and crying, and I came there just shortly after that, and we got him into Hotel Dieu, got his arm in a sling. And the point that I'm trying to make is that the officers would not tell him who they were. They would not say what their badge number was, what department they were in, or anything like that. I took him to a lawyer downtown, and we contacted the police department, and they would not say who the officers were, what shift it was, what their name was, what their badge number was. So it seemed to me, and he still has not received any money from a lawyer for a settlement or anything. And their excuse was, well, we thought he was somebody else. And this guy is so obvious, there's nobody else in Windsor that looks like him. The second thing I want to mention is about the 4-quadrant system, where they take a city, they divide it in 4 quarters, they put 8 police officers in each quarter, and I feel that's a discriminatory way of doing it. Because if there's 8 police officers that work together every day in the police cars, they know their families, their wives, their kids, and if you happen to do something against one of those 8 police officers in that area, you got 7 other police officers on your case. And I'm suggesting a rotation of officers, that no officers should be together year after year, or month after month in the same neighborhoods, that they should rotate them and have them as that. I had a suggestion, I don't know, it's crazy, but there are boats that come up the river, and I was going to suggest a Carnival Cruise Line to park up here and have like a treatment center or a place where people could come and get rid of their needles and get some help. And I talked to the Port Authority, and you can get a boat up through the docks with 550 rooms on it, and just a place where it could be create jobs as well, but to have a place where they could come and not commit suicide or whatever. But I don't know how you'd maintain it, but we have talked to Brian Massey, Lisa Gretzky. We've been to the meetings in our neighborhood, and we've tried to be informed. So again, I don't want to close on a positive note. I think this is a good thing, but the kids today, it's a different day than when we grew up. And so I just want to thank each one of you for taking your time tonight and giving us a chance to express our feelings. But I feel that this poor guy really needs to get some help and some legal help, some money in a lawsuit for what they did to him. He'll never be the same again. So, and he's senior citizen, 74. So there's no need for what happened. And so that's the kind of thing I think could be avoided.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. First off, thank you very much for holding this. This is an amazing session. We had a great conversation at our table here. Had some really awesome young men with us. And I think right off the bat, when we started with the first question, it ended up becoming more of an educational piece because many of the young men didn't know much about street checks or carding and whatnot. So as we were kind of going into the conversation and having, going through the guidelines and whatnot, some key points that were kind of really echoed throughout the other conversations throughout the room came up. But something in particular that was interesting was many of the young men were saying, you know, there could be really some positive impacts of this, but there are also different opportunities to make mistakes, and there's opportunities that things can go wrong, and there's important to have some type of proper checks and balances if this were to work. Essentially, really putting that the importance of the police understanding the individuals in a community, and the community understanding the police that are essentially within that community as well. Very much throughout the conversation, there was that echoing point of understanding who's in the area and kind of really getting to know one another and building that rapport. So just like kind of like what TJ was saying in the, beforehand, that you can have that understanding of who exactly are the officers in the neighborhood, and that nuance can really be understood. There were, I think, in terms of the definition of that, for many of the youth, they were wondering about what exactly was the definition of street checks and carding. And when asked if they, after we had that conversation, if many of their own friends and other students would know those definitions and know what their rights were and know what those requirements were, many of them said that it would be unlikely. But that they're getting some information from different shows like Let's Talk, I think that's what you were saying, and different kind of conversational points at school. So that was really heartening to hear. The other big piece, I think, was, I think hands down, when it came down to the question about whether or not they've been stopped in by police in the last year, 3 of the young men had brought up that yes, they had, in different circumstances.
And all of them great, good enough, and nothing ended up being negative that came out of those interactions. But having this conversation now that they didn't know about what their rights were in those situations, what the requirements were in those situations, looking back on it, they did have some questions about whether or not the stop was a legal stop, right? And I think that's a fair thing to wonder. Now that you have that new information, you can then kind of use that going forward. So I think that's really important that we were able to learn that today, I think. Another big piece, I think, was the conversation that we had with respect to the police stops, whether or not there were arguments in terms of the benefits of it or if there are negative pieces. And again, I think I might have mentioned this beforehand, but there were arguments for both sides that sure, there could be, it could help speed up some of this, some investigations, but it could definitely be abused and it could definitely be used in a negative way. For example, like racial profiling. And it could have an impact, a lifelong impact, if someone was falsely accused or in that type of a situation. I think with the young men that are in the room that have come out today and have explained the different situations that they've had, and young women, it's important to understand that, you know, we don't want to have that as have that on their record, on their legacy, even though in reality they're doing everything they can to be on the straight and narrow type thing. They're involved in their communities, they're active in their neighborhoods, and they're really showing great pride and they're really, again, boosting up our neighborhoods. Many of the youth here are from Glengarry, and again, like Mahari kind of pointed out, the young women over here too, they're from the Glengarry area as well, and so they were really proud of that. That's a really important thing, that we have these individuals that are informed, that are getting informed, and they're a part of our community. So I'll just end it off at that, and again, thank you very much.
Awesome, thank you.
Hello, my name is Abiola Afolabi, and okay. Again, thank you very much for this great event, which is well needed. I'm going to try not to answer the questions that have been answered the way we answered them.
Thank you.
Just to save time. So to add to what has been said, we go to the last question, the final thoughts. We believe that people need to be, especially, not just the officers, even the community, need to be deprogrammed of what they were raised with, the information that was passed on to them, informally, about certain groups, about certain races. Because that affects everybody, including our police officers. They're human beings too. So we discussed the carding, whether it's of benefit or not. We discussed it at length, and we know that it could be useful. For example, the RIDE program that they do to check if people are drunk or not. Nobody ever complains about that because it's everybody. But carding became an issue when certain people felt victimized. So for our final thoughts, we feel that a lot is being done to train or to train our police officers, but a lot more needs to be done. We need to be having some real deep, heart-to-heart discussions where people can actually, examine themselves and say, what do I really think about the natives? What do I think? What did my grandpa tell me about these people? Mm-hmm. And we need to get deprogrammed of those negative conceptions that affect the judgments when it's time to do their jobs. So we feel that's what's coming out. And in addition to that, it also comes from the community. 2 young black boys were delivering the National Post. Within the first week, there were so many phone calls made to the police because National Post gets delivered at 5 a.m. So this, in the very white neighborhood, it's like, So again, this is home for all of us. We will recommend that there should be some get-together time so we get to know who we are, get to know who your neighbor is, and just forget whatever fear you had of somebody that looks different from you. We also talk about the need to solicit feedbacks rather than make the the communities that have been negatively affected, rather than make it an added burden for them to be saying, hey, come and listen to us. The government should reach out to them and say, hey, we want to hear from you. How are we doing? Are you seeing any improvement? Are we doing better? Because we want to make sure we do it right. Just those words alone will be comforting and encouraging, so that we get to see the police officers more and more as part of us, as our friends, as the people that are there for our sake, which we believe they are, and they are doing an awesome work, especially in Windsor. No doubt about that. We have the best. But they can still get even more best, if there's such a thing. And then we also thought about empowering people through knowledge. Let people know that, you can do this, you can do that. So when they are stopped, give information and also listen. And people already talked about respect. And the last one, we talked about the community outreach. Yes, I'm a leader of an organization. We have so many other organizations represented here. We can organize events and bring them, but it will be nice also for them to actually say, hey, we want to deliver this workshop. We want to speak to you in the layman's term what this new regulation means. We would like to do it on this particular day, or we will be available in the next 4 weeks. Pick a date. Let them reach out to us, and we'll make it happen. We will reach out, they will reach out. And also to go through, somebody mentioned the schools, the churches, wherever. I really feel that we all need to work together to bring this problem to an end. And to conclude, we decided that the carding brings fear, anger, frustration, and the feeling of helplessness and humiliation. All those are negative. Even though there could be some benefits to carding, the disadvantages, the problems it brings are just too many. That it's better to do away with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So that I believe that concludes the report backs. Again, on behalf of Justice Tulloch will come up shortly. I just want to thank you. This was a great process. Again, we acknowledge that these conversations can be difficult. We thank you for. There's a hand up. Sorry, Dave. Is there a microphone? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity and for bringing this event here. I have a question that I think maybe wasn't captured on the pre-selected questions that were asked. Personally, I see this as an opportunity to be educated and to be informed as a citizen. And I'm wondering, since we have different parties here, like police officers here, and even as citizens here, I'm wondering, in terms of the carding process, does anyone have a positive experience about that? Maybe in terms of even the police, any benefits that have come out of the carding, that maybe this can also be a process of being informed as a citizen or as a normal community member. Because for me, I think maybe there was a reason why the police thought about this process. But I'm wondering, has there been any benefits? Has there been any positive impacts that they've gained from that? Because as I said from our table, we noticed that most of the police data is not available. It's not for public consumption. So maybe for those who are already in the system, maybe it's not the purpose for this meeting. That's not the purpose for this meeting. But at the same time, I'm wondering, since the meeting is about carding, I'm wondering, is there any positive outcome?
So the questions, if you check the question list, which I don't know if you were able to review that, ma'am, the question list would have drawn any variety of experiences to the center. So people would have had the ability to answer about whatever their experience is. So I think that answers your question in the sense that people shared what their experiences were. Okay? Thank you so much. Again, on behalf of myself, thank you, and the team, Justice Tulloch has the last word. I just want to remind people that that you can follow us online, and also you can continue to engage with the process. If you have a thought that you didn't remember or you didn't get to express today, you can check us online, and also you can share that information with people that aren't here today, because we're going to be reviewing everything that we get from you via the website. Okay, so please do check us out. And Justice Tulloch has the last word.
Again, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out. Windsor is a very important community. It's very diverse. It's one of the most and oldest diverse communities in Canada. And I think, we all want to ensure that our relationship, the citizens and the police relationships, are harmonious and the interactions are positive and beneficial to both the community as well as to the whole concept of public safety. But there has to be an understanding that each and every one of us as individuals, as citizens, we have certain civil liberties and rights, and those rights and civil liberties need to be respected. So it's always a balance, right, between the issues of public safety and that of the respect for individual rights and liberties. And at the end of the day, that's what this is about. It's about public-police interactions. And, I've heard and I've listened very carefully to all the comments that have been made. And some of them are extremely difficult. And I echo Kike's comments to each and every one of you, wherein she acknowledged how difficult it may have been for some of you to go back deep down into your memories to bring up some of these most emotionally and heart-wrenching, I would think, experiences. But we're hoping that at the end of this process, we will come to some understanding as to how to proceed on a go-forward basis with a very positive police community interaction model. There's all sorts of anecdotal type of information out there. What I can assure you is that I will be doing a comprehensive, not only review, but study of the whole issues. And, we will report back in a very clear, very concise, and very objective way. And I'm hopeful that at the end of this process, we'll be able to answer a lot of these questions and outline a path forward so that we as a community throughout Ontario can be true leaders in police community interactions. Thanks again for your contributions.